Well, while we're getting our technical Zoom set up, I just want to have everybody join me in a round of applause for our filmmaker. And I just want to personally thank you so much for making this documentary, going all in to get this story out there. And I guess before I even ask you how you met Addy and came to make this documentary about his journey, not just his battle with ALS, but also just fighting for Medicare for all, I want to ask you, what impact has this film had for his Be a Hero campaign? Now that it has been released in the cinemas in the summer, now that it has been streaming on various platforms and it's been through the festival circuit, I can only imagine that its impact has been widespread. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me and for sharing Addy's story and for bringing it to this community. And yeah, the impact I hope is ongoing. I hope at the end of the credits, there's a logo that says to join Addy in his fight, go to joinaddy.com and you can be a part of the Be a Hero campaign. So that impact that the film will have is up to everybody here. I mean, we want everybody who sees the film to, of course, have the political goals of winning Medicare for all, and we want everybody to be inspired about, I think, the transcendent nature of Addy's story, which really for me goes beyond politics, about how we make the most with the time we have left and how we deal with the tragic and difficult circumstances in our lives. But very specifically, Addy is right now, at home on Twitter, confronting politicians about the reconciliation bill, ensuring that home care funding is included in the Build Back Better bill, having conversations with politicians, talking to the Biden administration, rallying activists, organizing bird dog trainings, all of the stuff you're doing in the film. And he needs volunteers, he needs donors to run this movement. And so, in addition to the warm feelings, I want people to know specifically about Addy's work. And I hope that the film continues to do that. In terms of the trajectory of the film, it will broadcast on PBS POV in January 24th, which is exciting because it's in basically 95% of American homes and has an average audience of, 2.5 million per program. And so I think that will be an exciting next step for the film beyond the festival audiences and streaming audiences.
Well, thank you so much. So I'm just going to ask, do we have our additional panelists on Zoom ready to go? Okay, well, in the meantime, I'm going to start by introducing who we have up here on the stage. So I'm going to start with Nick, since he's directly to my left. So as you know, he is the director of Not Going Quietly, which was executive produced by Mark and Jay Duplass. And the film premiered at the 2021 South by Southwest Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award and Special Jury Prize. He's also the founder and CEO of People's Television, a creative studio that produces award-winning independent films, as well as digital and broadcast content for the world's leading brands. He also produced a film called Valley of the Saints, which was shot under lockdown in Kashmir. And this film won the Audience Award at the Sundance Film Festival and the Asia Africa Prize at the Dubai Film Festival. His first documentary, La Americana, broadcast worldwide on networks, including National Geographic and Al Jazeera. Thank you so much for being here, Nicholas. And we have, next to Nicholas, Liam Doherty, who is a longtime advocate for the disability community and a member of Disabled in Action and ADAPT. He currently works as the Access and Functional Needs Coordinator for the City of Philadelphia Department of Public Health, and he received his BA at St. John's College and his MPA from the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Liam, so much for being here. And we have hopefully another panelist, Andraéa LaVant, on Zoom. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Andraéa in the meantime. She is the founder and president of LaVant Consulting, a social impact communications firm that offers corporate development and content marketing for brands and nonprofits. LCI's specialty is helping brands speak disability with confidence. As a communications consultant and inclusion specialist, Andraéa has over a decade of experience working with programs that support youth and adults with disabilities and other underserved populations. So hopefully Andraéa will be joining us soon. But let's start and get into this conversation. My first few questions are for Nick. Nick, can you tell us how you came to meet Addie and how you came to make this film?
Yeah, happy to. As you mentioned in my bio, to support my bad financial habit of making documentary films, I also make commercials and advertisements and social video work through a company that I founded. And we really try to focus on brands and causes and candidates that align with our values, which are mostly around progressive organizing causes, environmental, social, racial, economic justice. And we do a lot of political ads. We did ads for the Biden campaign in 2020 and numerous congressional races for left-leaning candidates in 2018. And I got a call in, I think it was January of 2018, from Liz Jaff, the firecracker political strategist that Addie met that day. And her and I had a mutual friend in common from the Obama campaign. And I got a phone call saying, hey, looking for somebody to help us make a video. I just met this guy on a plane. It was crazy. Talked to the senator, filmed it, and we're going to try to launch this healthcare nonprofit, basically. It was how I kind of understood it. Like it was going to be I basically thought it was going to be a fundraiser about ALS. I didn't really put it together until I agreed to do it, flew out to meet Addie. And actually the very first frame that I ever shot with Addie is in the movie, which is when he's topless and, bare-chested and getting changed. And he's like, all right, Nick, let's do the thing. And that moment for me was incredibly memorable. It had to be in the movie for me because it was really when I fell in love with him and realized that he was dealing with this situation in a way that was very unlike anybody else would ever handle this news. And I didn't know that he would go on to achieve what he had achieved. And that moment for me was so important because it made me realize that this is somebody that I wanted to spend the years I knew it would take to make this film with. You have to be very careful in choosing who you want to make a documentary about for your own sanity and well-being. And it was also a moment where I realized there was a very powerful parallel between Addie's personality and the way he was resisting the disease to the way he was resisting the darkness of the Trump administration and everything that was happening in Congress at that time, which we were just talking about a few moments ago. And so that's the beginning of the film. And it was, again, at the end of that interview for this 90-second YouTube video for the Be a Hero campaign, I said, Addie, now that that's done, can we record a Kickstarter where you ask for money for a documentary that we're going to make one day? We never did that Kickstarter, but I had to ask him then because he'd already been sick for a year when I met him. And so there was a huge urgency to do everything as fast as we could. There was no courtship process. And there couldn't be for Addie either because he wanted his story preserved. So we had to move very fast.
Mm-hmm. And he was all about it? Like he completely agreed for this to become a documentary?
Yeah, what he said on a Q&A that we did recently is that he had to pause and think about it and look deep into his heart, sit down with Rachel, think about what this would mean for him, for his family, for his children to expose his life and bear his pain in this way. But what he decided that what really matters in the end is for him to be rich and famous. And that agreeing to be in a documentary might help him get that, which I think is especially funny because for me it's like a half joke. On one hand, it's not that he wanted to be rich and famous, but it's that he thought agreeing to do this could help him win Medicare for all. I mean, he knew that this was a tool.
An exposure vehicle.
Yeah, and he knew, I think also, he's if you haven't gathered from the film, he's a very strategic thinker. And he has a decade as a political organizer before he became disabled, before he was diagnosed with ALS. When he met Jeff Flake on that plane, it was not what the media portrayed of like dying father confront senator. It was actually lifelong trained activist, policy expert, confront senator. And the reason I say that is because Adi really understands intuitively that the personal is political. He had been telling other people's stories his whole life, and those protests you see early on that he did against the Federal Reserve. Many people were familiar with him before that work, but then the story became his own. And so sometimes I think about that line where, Liz talks about how, yes, of course we're exploiting his disease, and I think Adi and I were kind of using each other a little bit, but for the same cause, for the goal of creating the change that we both want to see.
Right, and in a way he just says that, use your lived experience to be your tool, your avenue to reach other people and connect to other people and convince other people that they can do something to change the world. So I think everybody is using their own story as a tool.
Yeah, Tracy says, when she gives these bird dog trainings, which we could only include a little bit of in the film, but she does those all over the country, and we've done some in conjunction with screenings of the film. She says that a lot of people are afraid to speak up politically because they're not experts on the issues, right? They can't debate the, Congressional Budget Office's assessment of a, healthcare plan, but everybody is an expert on their own lived experience. And so you have the authority to speak up about your experience with institutions, with government, with social services or lack thereof. And that gives you the right to speak up in public the way these activists do. And I think that's very compelling.
Yeah, so I also agree. Has everybody here heard of this term, dog birding?
Bird dog.
What? Bird dog.
Bird dog.
Bird dog. Has everybody heard of this before? So one of the things that I find very interesting is throughout the movie, there's different ways of describing this, is basically asking these Congress people to hold themselves accountable. And in this process of common everyday folks approaching people that can make a difference and change the laws, this process of holding people accountable, they call it civil disobedience, that we're here to disrupt because what we see is corrupt. I wanted to segue and ask Liam, in your disability work, being that I don't know if this is common throughout the activist community or this is just a training that this specific campaign implemented, can you talk about this process? Have you come across it, or what are some of the tools that you've used for your activism?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. I think the first thing is, and this kind of falls on what you were saying too, that really what we're going for is the theater of it. We're going for the drama and to bring the qualitative things out front and center. That's why I feel like, it was in the movie, that many times people in the office, the congressional offices that we'll go to or whatever will be like, oh yeah, well we should just sit down and have an official meeting. And that's not what it's about. I think activism is best when it captures that theater. that trauma, real life.
Thank you. So I want to go back to Nick and ask, we have Andraéa. Andraéa, can you hear us? Oh, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry about the technical transition here. I'm not sure how much of the conversation you heard, but we were just talking about, at this very moment, just some kind of tools that activists use to get the attention of their representatives and to create change and disrupt situations that they see to be unjust. So do you want to weigh in on how you've used these tools and what you call this?
Sure. I heard a slight bit, so I hope that I'm not being entirely too repetitive. But I mean, a big tool for me is, and for our community in general, is digital activism, social media being a huge platform. Hashtag activism, in fact, is often what we call it, and really getting the attention there, calling folks out. We're doing it, daily, and seeing results from that. So that's what I would add. I don't want to go too far because I imagine you all have covered a lot of it.
But let me go back to you, Nick, for a moment. So if you can talk about the process of shooting this film, because not only was this an emotional journey for everybody involved in the campaign, but you as a director having to balance out, your connection to Addie, your feelings for him as your subject. Can you talk about just all of the technical processes that went into shooting this, but also just the emotional weight that you had to navigate yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously became very close to Addie making this film, and Addie and I are the same age. We're both, upper middle class, kind of Jewish, New Yorkers, essentially, and grew up between Southern California and the Upper West Side. And there was just a great sense for me always that this could have been me, what happened to him. And so watching him go through this was hard, but also I think, probably the biggest privilege of my artistic and professional and maybe personal life as well. I think all of the uplift that I hope people in the audience felt about their own situation, about their own lives, gratitude for what we have, and also a feeling of empowerment that I can actually make a difference in the world and my family and my life, no matter what obstacles I'm faced with. Like, I got 3.5 years of that injected daily, and so I feel very grateful to have had that experience. And the process of making the film was complicated on a lot of levels. On one hand, we just kind of did what like Wayne Gretzky said makes him a good hockey player, which is to follow the puck. So we just kind of kept shooting and seeing what Addie did next. But there was a lot of things that really were very constructed and not dramatized, but we created a narrative together with Addie. I mean, this is not what happened in Addie's life over 3.5 years. This was a cinematic arc that we were able to draft, which showed the milestones and the full emotional journey that Addie went on that we thought was most important. And so the craziness of that was, one, just always being there at the moments where Addie, we knew we're going to go through those beats, and that entailed us getting our own RV to follow Addie's RV around, and that was, the speed at which Addie moved, literally like 11 miles an hour in that wheelchair, but also they weren't waiting for us to do these trainings. They were just going, and Addie was the one always pushing us to go harder, as you can see in the film. He always wanted to do more and do another event. And the hardest thing, I think, technically about making this and most unusual, and both on an emotional and technical level, was that Addie really was losing his voice. I mean, that thing that happened on the stage where Addie lost it, that actually happened pretty frequently. Almost everything that you see in the movie was emblematic of something that happened all the time. Like, Addie was usually getting pretty stoned every night, but we only deal with showing that once. But in terms of his voice, what that meant is, like, if he was going to lose his voice, we couldn't do an interview with him that day. We couldn't ask him anything because that would be time that he'd be spending working on the film or dealing with us instead of Skyping his wife or Carl at night. And so that created this crazy kind of ethical dilemma of like, do we want what's best for the film or best for Adi or best for his audience or best for his family? And usually we chose not for the film. And for that reason, there's not a lot of interviews with Adi in the movie. I mean, there's some. But we ended up using his voice through the Tobii Dynavox eye gaze system. That that had to be the framework for the emotional arc of the film because I couldn't talk to Adi very much because I didn't want to take that voice away from him. So that was one of the many war stories we have making that movie.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I was actually wondering when I was watching also if that was something that Liz had to go through too, is like how far to push him each day, especially when he's vocalizing that he doesn't feel he can continue, but this is what the campaign needs, and it's like when do you override, when do you hold back, when do you let empathy take over? So I mean, I credit you with learning how to handle that on a day-to-day basis, and what we see is just this incredible story. So you obviously knew how to balance all of the important day-to-day aspects of the struggle, of the fight, of trying to change legislation, but then you balance that with those little tender moments between his wife and with Carl to show just what Adi wanted to communicate in all of those meetings with the senators and the Congress people, is that I'm only human, I'm just like you, I just want a relationship with my family, I want to see my child grow, just please let that happen. You can let that happen, you can change a life, you can save a life with your vote. So I think you did a perfect job with balancing those two aspects of his struggle.
Thank you. Yeah, one thing Bradley Whitford, who's our executive producer, says is that Adi obliterates the line between the personal and the political, and that's what we wanted to do with the film. All of the personal scenes in the movie are actually political because Adi being home with Carl is time that he has with his family because of healthcare, and that's the case for all of us, and hopefully that came through in the film.
So I want to now pivot to policy and administration, but getting on this theme, I wanted to mention one of the quotes that I was really taken with. This was at one of the rallies, and there was a woman that Adi had speak, and basically she was ignored, and the newscaster just happened to get this quote from her, but she said, "Isn't this what it means to live in a democracy, to do something when we are dissatisfied with the results that we see?" So I wanted to open up this question to the entire panel. If you can all weigh in on where you feel we are today in fighting for equitable, accessible health care for all Americans. So how about we start with Liam, and then Andraéa, and Nick, you can close it out.
Yeah, so I guess, we are dealing with an administration that at least tries to listen, which I think is a leg up from 4 years ago. And yeah, so in that respect, I think we're getting closer. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the fight for healthcare and Adi's fight is sort of, it speaks to a bigger fight against just, acceptance, realization of like someone else's humanity. Recognizing the struggles of people with disabilities, and to affect political change, I think the first step is to have an administration that listens, that has their ear to the ground, and I mean, I was in DC a few times with Trump in office, and you know what, I mean, like was said in the movie, you know, there was a barrier between represented and representative, you know, and I think that feels different now. There is a long way to get to where we want to be.
Yeah, thank you. And Andraéa, do you want to comment? Uh-oh. Well, if you're able to repeat the question to Andraéa, but basically, if you can answer how the recent shift in our administration impacted the landscape for access and social justice activists.
So, actually there are, you know, in this administration, we've already seen some significant strides with the matter of fact. This past Friday, yesterday, the House passed the Build Back Better Act, which is going to be huge in terms of really funding critical programs, including Medicaid, home and community-based services. There's actually $150 billion in funding that's been set aside specifically for home and community-based services, or what we call HCBS. So it's not as much as folks originally were going for, but it actually is the most money that's ever been set aside, the largest investment in home and community-based services that the country has ever seen. So it went through the House, still has to make it through the Senate, which means that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but the fact that we have already seen this within 2021 happening is really significant. So we're getting somewhere.
Thank you so much. And Nick, do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was going to repeat mostly what was just shared, which is that Adi, well, one, I'm very optimistic about the possibility of winning Medicare for all. It's probably a 10 or 20-year horizon, but the reason I'm optimistic is because of the work of Adi and the other activists on this stage and the greater healthcare justice and disability rights movement. More people than ever support it. All the polls show that a vast majority of people, for the first time ever, support a single payer or a public option. And that, to me, just needs to be translated through the will of the activists, like you see in the film, and through polls and through our elections into a reality, but the support is there. And then, you know, in the incremental level, as Andrew pointed out, the House just passed the largest home care funding bill ever. This is what Adi has been really focused on over the last few months, and it's a huge victory. It's, again, just repeating, it's not the $400 billion that they wanted, but $150 billion is the most that's ever been spent, and it allows people like Adi to stay in their homes. We were talking about that before, about the personal being political, and that's what this kind of funding allows. It supports the kind of heroic caregiving that you see in the movie. And this just wouldn't have happened under the Trump administration. It wouldn't have happened without winning all three branches by, you know, eking out the victory. And so I think it's important to celebrate these small victories. And I say small because, you know, it's not universal health care, but it's a huge amount of spending. And I think when you celebrate those victories, it inspires people to win. It shows how much it matters that we keep the House in 2022, which is not a sure thing. So that's, I think, my takeaway is to stay hopeful. And you quoted Adi at the beginning, which I think is, you know, that hope is a hammer quote, which is really what the film is about, is that hope, as Adi says frequently, is not a state of mind, it's not a feeling, it's a state of action, and that we create hope through doing and through taking some small steps. And it doesn't have to be bird dogging. I just want to say that to the group here. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I need to go to my senator's office and bang on the door. I was talking to Jim Lebrecht, the director of Crip Camp, who I believe Andraéa might know, and he said that what a lot of people would do back in the 60s and 70s is a lot of people didn't have the ability to go to protests because they didn't even have a wheelchair or a way to get to the sit-in. So what they would do is bake cookies at home and bring them to the activists. And I think that metaphor is really important. You can donate, you can support causes without leaving your home. That's kind of how I feel as a filmmaker. Like, I'm actually not the one in the streets working on Build Back Better, but this film is like me baking the cookies for the activists. It's a tool to help empower and energize them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always share with people is that the platform that I personally have to be my own kind of activist is sharing movies like this through the film festival, reaching audiences like all of you. It's something simple that I can do just through my job to make sure that films like this are in the lineup and to make sure that these kinds of stories are shared and told. And so all of you who are on social media also have your own platform for sharing your own story, making the personal political. And I just want to ask our panel about social media and activism. So if you can, Liam and Andraéa, and one thing I didn't share about Andraéa is that she actually happens to be the impact producer for the documentary film Crip Camp. So if you saw Crip Camp, Andraéa worked on this film. And so when you're answering this question, Andraéa, if you can share a little bit about the impact work of Crip Camp and how social media played into that. And Liam, also just how you use social media as a tool. Okay, so Andraéa, why don't you start this time?
Sure, absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, social media is very huge in Crip Camp. Social media overall is a huge place. I think that social media means different things to different people, and it means multiple things to people. And I think for those of us with disabilities, often, first and foremost, it is a place of community and a place to grow and learn and come together just from an identity perspective. Which is really, I think, one of the reasons why the Camp Impact campaign thrived as much as it did, because of the fact that that's where we convene, whether it was on Twitter or on Instagram or even in Facebook groups, as it relates to connecting as disabled folks. And then from there, it absolutely was about amplifying the needs of our community and really increasing the visibility. That's what Crip Camp really brought to the forefront. So many things that for many people was hidden. I mean, over and over again, we just kept hearing so many people say, why didn't I know about these things that were happening? Why didn't I know about the 504 sitting? Why didn't I know about, the Capitol crawl or the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act? And so it was an opportunity to bring that to the forefront, but even more so, not only to reflect on the past, but also connect it with the present. And so whether it was from a media representation side, for example, the fact that, because Crip Camp was nominated for an Oscar, it was great that folks like Jim, who was just mentioned, really advocated for ensuring that the Oscars had a wheelchair accessible stage and just in general had accessibility like never before. And then, of course, being supported by, and the film being executive produced by President Barack and Michelle Obama, that also means that even from whether it's a policy perspective, whether it's looking at things from a community building perspective, there were so many different ways that social media played into it, and still to this day, even though it's not active as it was before, have so many supporters that are continuing to amplify the film's messaging for today. So yeah, social media is huge.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the hard work you did to expand the community building campaign for that film. It was an amazing film, another extraordinary documentary. And Liam, do you want to speak to social media?
Sure. Yeah, I'm having trouble hearing everything, so I hope I don't repeat too much. But I think that's a real difference in today's landscape, that we're able to convey a narrative or share a story instantly, like across the country. And I think that has given a lot of power to social media and press and everything. I know that every action that I'm on, or I was on, communicating to various news channels, and that part is really critical. What Liz said in the movie, I forget her exact words, but the little exchanges matter so much, in today's landscape. The story is where the power is, and it connects to everything else, but I think we're kind of lucky in a way, to be living in this place that, like Nick was saying, that before, if you weren't physically able to be at a location, your voice was not heard. You had no way of. It wouldn't always surprise us how recently curb cuts were put in, who were required in Philadelphia, and nationally too. But just imagine that those stories weren't just not put in front of people. That they were isolated from everyone's ears because people could not physically show up. So media is so important.
Yeah, it was really important to democratize the whole activism landscape. And like you said, people that can't physically get to a protest still have a way to communicate, still have, their voice being heard through their Instagram account, Facebook, or whatnot. So thank you for continuing that fight and using social media as a tool to tell the stories, people in our city who are fighting for access and disability rights. And do you want to speak to the social media campaign that you currently have for the film?
Oh, sure, yeah, I agree with everything that Liam said, and Roger also wanted to add, for me as a filmmaker, what attracted me to doing this story was really not just about Adi, even though I mentioned falling in love with him, et cetera, earlier. It was actually this notion of what Adi was doing was, he basically said, hey, that thing I did to Jeff Flake where I told my story and it shook the nation, I'm going to take that on the road, and I'm going to empower all of these people armed with cell phones and Twitter to tell their stories, film them, put them out, and change policy. And actually, that's what every documentary filmmaker I know tries to do, and that's what we're trying to do writ large, and as social justice creators. And so, Adi was actually just it was like a storytelling movement, and that's what I wanted to do with this film, was talk about the power of storytelling, not the power of Adi's story, which is powerful, but the idea that stories have power. Adi kind of proved that with this movement. And so that, to me, is what the good side of social media is. We know a lot about the bad side as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was what actually you just mentioned is just how storytelling can empower each of us to make a difference. So if you can repeat just for our audience, how can they be involved with Addie's Be a Hero movement? And do you have some recommendations for audience members that maybe are not on social media, but things they can do in their everyday life for moving human rights forward and advocating for accessibility for all? Yeah.
Yes, you can join Adi at beaherofund.com. You can also support the movie at notgoingquietlyfilm.com. And yes, in addition to protesting and bird dogging and voting and tweeting, you can also vote. You can also donate. You can also, I'm interested to hear from Liam and Andraéa about other disability rights initiatives and what's happening here in Philly specifically, because I think a lot of these fights are local, even though Adi takes everything to the fullest national level. But I think there's a subtle message in this film, which is also about treating people in your civic society with dignity and respect, and it's about extending the network of your care and of your circle outside of your family, but into a community that is beyond yourself. And so I hope that, I sometimes think that Adi, yes, he's doing activism, but he also could have been, making a great community art project with the time he has left. What he did is he turned this incredibly painful and meaningless thing into something that heals himself and others. And so that's, I think, the message of a film, at the most metaphysical level.
Thank you so much. And Liam, can you tell us what you're working on locally?
Sure. I can speak to, first of all, Philadelphia has, I think there was a Pew study on this recently, but we have the highest disability rate of any major U.S. city. 16% of Philadelphians have a disability, and there's this huge correlation with poverty. Disability should be a really important thing here. And so when I was really on the activist front, we pushed to have the mayor's office on disability before, I think, 2015. There was not one, and a bunch of activists really got behind this and held on to the data, and also, forced the narrative of what it's like to be a Philadelphian with a disability, and that was put into place. I think maybe the current policy agenda, it was recently passed in Philadelphia, the construction impact tax. So now a small percentage of new construction, but you can look this up and know more about it than when I am able to. But so there is part of a fund now that goes towards building adaptive housing for people with disabilities, and activists are still trying to increase that fund, so housing is really kind of essential and sort of touches on a lot of other aspects. Unattended care is really big, and as of now is a very federal issue, and I put my mask there.
That happens to me all the time.
And, a big part of like BBB is not Medicaid, HCBS, open community-based services funding. That's really essential. And if I can, I'm sorry. And the other part of your question, I would say in Philadelphia, I think everything that was mentioned before is exactly right. I think a lot of bigger movements start locally. And you'd be surprised that things can happen when you call Keggers people, when you get them in your corner, when you build relationships, because outside of that, it really is just lobbyism. And I think we all know in Philadelphia, especially recently, lobbyism can be a really, really big and I don't want to say too much on that, but I think building those relationships, being in front of people and getting them to understand where you're coming from.
Thank you so much. And and that fact that you said in the beginning that we have the highest percentage out of any city, did you say 16%?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, and Andraéa, if you want to speak to this as well, thank you. So in our everyday lives, what would you recommend for people that don't use social media or aren't yet ready to let their voices be heard on their own platforms? What other ways can they be involved with advocating for disability rights?
Great question. So I think a lot of what was said is exactly true. Voting is huge. Finding out what's going on in your local communities, in your cities, in your states. Connecting to centers for independent living, often they're on the ground, really have the knowledge about what's happening even in local government and state government. Connecting with researching your local representatives, being active in that way, and I think just wherever you see disability not being represented or talked about, bringing it up, and more so than that, specifically if you do not identify as disabled, aiming to ensure that there are disabled voices that are a part of any conversation, to be honest with you, any sort of decision making, whether it's in a school setting, whether it's in an employment setting, whether we're talking about healthcare or anything in between. If you notice there is no disability representation, that means that there's a huge, we're 1 in 4 Americans are disabled, so it means that there's a huge population of people that are being left out, and that shouldn't be the case. And so it's really aiming to be an ally in that way and an advocate if you do identify as such, and ensuring that the disabled voices are represented as much as possible in every situation you might find yourself in.
And what was the last thing you just said? Or the last sentence. So thank you very, very much, Andraéa, and I totally agree is to have representation of disabled people in all facets of society and civil discourse in leadership positions, people at the table that can speak to the experience of disabled people and what the everyday struggle is, very similar to what everybody's struggle is and probably compounded by so many things that we don't even understand. So thank you very much for bringing that up. And Nick, before we all leave today, if you can just leave us with anything that you wanted this film to communicate that we haven't talked about yet, what you wanted people to take away from watching the film.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the other panelists. I think I would just leave people with the awareness that the film is available now on Apple TV and on Amazon and iTunes. And one way that you can help spread Adi's message, whether you use social media or not, is to let your friends know about the film. This is a sort of underdog film, and even though PBS is behind it, gets drowned out by a lot of the noise of other bigger budget documentaries. So I would love to ask everybody here to let their friends know about the movie if they enjoyed it and help spread the story of Adi to the world.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Nick, Liam, and Andraéa for joining us. Thanks to all of you and for your patience through these technical difficulties. And thanks for coming to the festival, and I hope to see you at future PJFM events. So thank you and good night to everybody.